This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name, of course, Eben Jansen. The show is live. It's broadcast from our studios in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube right now with the whole show available on our YouTube channel on demand. Today, we look at the aftermath after a 5.5 earthquake hit the northern parts of southern Africa yesterday. Education continues to be a concern, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And we'll close by looking at the Rays of Hope program that's making a real difference in the Alexander Township here in Johannesburg. But first, let's get a news update from Katrine Milan.
Well, hello and welcome. I'm Katrine Milan, and let's take a look at the stories making headlines this morning. Officials are assisting families in the northwest whose homes were damaged by yesterday's 5.5 magnitude earthquake. Around 400 houses were damaged in Orkney, as well as 3 clinics in another northwest town, Klerksdorp, have had to be shut down due to severe structural damage. The Council for Geoscience says it will take a few days to establish exactly what caused the quake. George Luca, the man accused of killing teaser strip club boss Lolly Jackson, is expected to appear in the Kempton Park Magistrates Court this morning on a charge of possession of stolen property. Luca will, however, reportedly not be appearing in court in person. He is expected to appear for the murder of Jackson in January next year. African leaders yesterday called for a deeper economic relationship with the United States at the annual US-Africa Summit in Washington, hailing investment pledges as a fresh step in the right direction. Speaking on a panel of African heads, President Jacob Zuma told the US-Africa Business Forum that Africa is now better organized to deal with the challenges facing the continent. And Israeli and Palestinian delegations are in Cairo for truce talks as a 72-hour ceasefire in Gaza appears to be holding for a second day. Israel withdrew ground forces from the Gaza Strip after a ceasefire got underway yesterday morning. The truce was mediated by Egypt as a first step towards negotiations on a more enduring end to the month-old war. Remember, all these top stories are available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Eben, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Katrina. Geologists have warned that more earthquakes in South Africa are inevitable. The Orkney-Klerksdorp area in the northwest, which was the epicenter of yesterday's quake, is especially at risk, they say. Seismology Unit Manager at the Council for Geoscience of South Africa, Michelle Grobler, has confirmed that it was one of the largest in the past decade at 5.5 magnitude. Now, for the latest, or for an update, let's cross to our reporter, Lizette Labuskaghni, who is in Orkney, to give us the latest. Very good morning to you, Lizette. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning to you, Eben.
Lizette, just give us what is the very latest concerning this earthquake or tremor, or what is it being called today?
Yeah, Eben, we are ourselves trying to figure out if we should call it an earthquake or a tremor. A lot of opinions on that. Currently, we are here at the Dr. Kenneth Kaunda District Municipalities Disaster Management Center, where we are seeing quite a number of high-ranking officials, mine management meeting here. They are deciding on the best plan forward. We know that they will have to go back to the areas that were the worst hit, the Kuma informal settlement just outside Stilfontein, where last night we saw quite a number of houses that has partially collapsed. Now, they made a call on residents to not go into these structures until an engineer has actually checked that these structures are safe.
What's the extent of the damage further out, Lizette, at the moment?
What we are seeing mostly is damage to homes that have collapsed. We are seeing even municipal buildings and hospitals that have damage to their walls. It's difficult to really ascertain how severe this damage is. Just after the quake, we visited the local fire brigade here in Klerksdorp, where also their building was damaged. We saw a crack straight through the floor there, and also some of the plaster that fell from their walls there. The same is happening in Stilfontein. Some shops damaged, corners that have got cracks, and all of them will this morning obviously go back and try to ascertain if this building is safe for them to continue working.
Lizette, would it be fair to ascertain that we are unprepared or were unprepared for such an event and should maybe improve as we go forward?
We are indeed very unprepared, Eben. We were in Klerksdorp when the earthquake struck us here, and even us just personally, we were not quite sure what to do. By the time that we realized that an earthquake has hit us, we were still standing in exactly the same spot, not too sure if we should evacuate, and if we evacuate, where do we actually go? Now, unfortunately, information is also slow to come out. Disaster management immediately kicking in, but we heard a lot of conflicting reports saying that miners were trapped at certain mines. A few seconds later, they say, no, there's no problem there, perhaps check there. This morning, we are seeing that they are more prepared, more organized. We're seeing the head of the disaster management in the province. He is here, he's assisting crews. But I have to say that the guys that are on the ground, our ambulance crews, they are being very active in the informal settlements, helping people move their furniture from homes. And they've been really working hard, only going to sleep at around 3 o'clock this morning.
Lizette, what has been the reaction of the public in these areas? I'm sure it must be shock and horror and a little bit of amusement as well.
Even the strange thing for me has been that the community of Orkney is so used to these tremors that they were not very worried when they actually felt that the earth was moving once again. They said they didn't even evacuate their buildings, they just carried on with work as usual. They say it was very obvious, they could see who was not from Orkney because they were the ones that were storming out of the building, very worried about it. We did manage to speak to a mine worker late last night at around 8 o'clock. He was underground at one of Anglo Gold Ashanti's mines when the earthquake struck, and he said he was stuck underground until about 6 o'clock because there was no electricity at the mine. It took them very long to evacuate. He says the dust was so bad that he could not even see his own hand in front of his face, and he was so scared that he says he's not going to work today. Even if the mine was to open, he says he cannot go back yet.
Finally, what about areas like Klerksdorp? I understand 3 clinics there have had to be closed. What's the latest there?
Yes, in Klerksdorp we're seeing a little less damage than in Orkney, which was obviously closer to the epicenter. But there are buildings that were affected. The municipal building at this stage has not been declared safe yet. They evacuated all municipal staff at around 1 o'clock, and they will first ascertain the damage to the buildings. We are seeing water pipes that has burst. We also saw some windows that completely blew out. The electricity went off immediately after the earthquake, and it was only repaired a bit later last night. So currently we are seeing quite a number of government officials, MECs, the Premier that is still here visiting areas that are affected. The municipality saying that people that were affected by the earthquake should please get in contact with them so that we can establish the extent of the damage to see if we should declare this a disaster area.
Lizette, thank you very much for that update. Of course, Lizette Labuskaghni will keep us updated as to how the story develops throughout the rest of the day. Now, social media erupted yesterday when this 5.5 earthquake, originally thought to be just a tremor, was felt across most parts of South Africa. Some saying they even felt tremblings as far afield as Botswana. Earthquakes and tremors are not normally associated with South Africa and leads to a heap of commotion on social media sites, as you can imagine. The earthquake was centered in Orkney, 120 kilometers southwest of Johannesburg, an area with a high concentration of gold mines. Now, in studio to explain to us a little bit more, we are joined by Dr. Herman van Niekerk, a structural geologist from the University of Johannesburg, and on the precautionary side and what to do going forward if you're in a situation like yesterday. We're joined by Robert Mulaudzi from Johannesburg's Emergency Services. Gentlemen, good morning and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Eben.
If I can start with you, Dr. van Niekerk, as a geologist, just put it into context. What did South Africans experience yesterday?
Well, in our opinion, South Africans did experience an earthquake. I mean, we have to make this distinction again between tremors and earthquakes, where we say tremors are man-made, earthquakes are naturally occurring events. But we, in a global scale, we have experienced the event which is not very uncommon. We've got about 1,000 to 1,500 of these events occurring all over the planet per year. In a South African context, it's very rare in a certain sense because we live on a very stable piece of continental crust. So we're not used to it. So when people feel something like this and we experience this, then obviously all the commotion, will happen. And obviously, a lot of people have lost their houses and have been injured and so on. So that just makes it, even more pronounced.
We've got pictures running of the city of Johannesburg yesterday when the quake sort of struck shortly after midday. Robert, I'm sure that you guys on the emergency service side must have been inundated here in Johannesburg with calls, people asking for assistance, or maybe people just didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, we did receive a lot of calls, mostly from the people who were just wanted to inquire to find out what is it that was happening. Because at the time we were down in Power Park in Soweto, as you recall, there was a building there which collapsed a month ago. So yeah, we did get calls. We're just happy that we didn't have to respond to any incidents or injuries which are related to, the earthquake itself.
I wanted to take it to the quake itself. It's now classified as an earthquake, 5.5 on the Richter scale. There we see how buildings and the like moved all around but this quake, where was the epicenter exactly, and how wide did it range? Some people say it was felt all over the country, but that wasn't the case.
Well, the epicenter was about 6 kilometers east of Auckland, and the earthquake occurred somewhere between 10 and 5 kilometers deep. It's very difficult to actually determine the depth. Obviously, as they look at the seismic data over the next couple of days, they'll become more clearer. But so that is pretty much where the earthquake actually occurs. And what people feel is the actual energy of this earthquake. You've got around about 2 kilotons equivalent of TNT released in an earthquake of this size.
Yeah.
And that produces waves that then actually move through the crust of the earth. And depending on the rock types that you actually have, these waves will either be transmitted better or worse. And that's why some people in certain places don't feel it. Other people feel it actually stronger. And that's also why it gets felt over quite a large area.
There's always the mass hysteria that comes with this kind of thing, and people always embellish a little bit about this sort of thing. But just tell us, do we have to fear future earthquakes now in South Africa, and will they become bigger? I think is a big question.
I don't think the people should fear earthquakes. Like I said, we live, especially here in the Johannesburg area and so on a very old, stable piece of continental crust. It's nearly 4 billion years old, parts of it. And that's been accumulated and settled many, many years ago. But what we do have is a bit of stress buildup in the crust. And this is the way that the crust can get rid of these stresses, is by movement on some of these old structures that we do have in the old crust. And it's rare. We've had a couple, throughout written up history in South Africa that we know about the same magnitude. It happens, but it's not something that we should fear. South Africa still experience far, far, far less and much smaller earthquakes than what other parts of the world actually experience.
Robert, we saw evacuations in Pretoria yesterday. The university was evacuated, a couple of other places. Did we have evacuations here in Johannesburg? And then also I'd like you to maybe, what's the sort of message that you send out to the people now? How should people respond going forward when this kind of thing happens?
Yeah, in Johannesburg, we didn't have to have any evacuations which were conducted. Even though, we saw a lot of evacuations which were occurring outside Johannesburg, of which those evacuation is very important for people in a working environment to be aware of what to do when like an earthquake, occurs. For instance, the standard in most of the time we're using the standard which is in an American standard to say that all the time when the earthquake struck, then you have to take a cover, hold something from the take a cover because, for instance, underneath the desk, why do you do that? You do that because when the building collapses, it will create, on top of that table, it will create a crawling space for you to move. You know, on the media, when television covers, you know, earthquakes, for us, you know, we have had a number of experiences because we get invited to other areas like the Philippines, the Japan, and the other areas. People are advised to avoid exterior walls. Exterior walls are these walls which has windows so that people can understand at home there. So because those walls are most likely to collapse when there's also, you know, glasses. There's also like mirrors which are hanging on those walls. What you do, you have to try and move to the interior walls, especially in the corners. That is where, as emergency service, those walls, when the building collapses, it doesn't matter how tall is the building. When it collapses, most of those areas, because those walls are much more stronger and they're much more safer, you will be able to be rescued if it happens that you cannot be able to move out. So you have to stay away from, you know, collapsed buildings or buildings which might collapse. You have to stay away from, you know, maybe street lights, anything which might collapse only if you are outside the building.
I took a walk around our building here at the SABC this morning to see if we have the right evacuation procedures and so forth. And the fact of the matter is that it's pretty much plastered all over next to the lifts everywhere, how to evacuate the building during an earthquake. All of these things are written up there, but people don't take heed of these things. They don't seem to read these kind of things also. How do you change people's perceptions to look at the stuff around them in buildings and to respond to that?
Yeah, it's very important for, you know, the working environment, because that is where you find out on a day now, there's a lot of people who are right now who are at the SABC building now at the moment. So it's very important for, you know, the supervisors or people who are managing to now and then, maybe after 6 months or so, to have an evacuation drill where we get invited as emergency services personnel to monitor, to advise you as to this is what is it that we're supposed to do on that evacuation drill, so that when the time comes, you know, there's no panic, because people were, you know, confused. I saw in some of the visuals there, you know, people didn't even know. You find out the person was working in that building maybe for 4 or 5 years, but he or she didn't know what is it that he's supposed to do. You find people working in that environment without even your headgears. I mean, you have to have like some kind of a construction head, because you cannot be walking up and down in the area like that, in an environment like that where that building is likely to collapse. Right now, we've got the after, you know, shock, whereby some buildings might not even have cracks at the moment. But those buildings, I cannot tell Eben now that building might collapse anytime. So it's good for people to stay alert in their working environment. They know exactly what is it that they're supposed to do.
Be alert and be conscious of the evacuation procedures within each building, as we continually see pictures of the earthquake yesterday. Dr. van Niekerk, if I can come back to you, we all had a good giggle about it yesterday on social media, but it's a very serious picture. I want to show some of the pictures that we've picked up on social media that people have shared with us or have put out there. I wanted to ask you, or just to tell us how serious this is and how dangerous earthquakes like these are for us here in South Africa. There we see a picture of somebody putting their garden chair over in the garden and go, "We will rebuild," all in jest, but this can be a serious matter.
Yeah, look, again, you know, in a worldwide context, you know, an earthquake of this magnitude are classified as small to moderate. Okay, so in a worldwide context, it's not very big. The problem comes in, as what we have seen now, is as soon as you go into areas where we've got buildings that are not properly constructed, then it becomes a real danger. Then it doesn't matter, actually, how small that earthquake is. If building standards are not conformed to and not properly constructed with correct materials, correct reinforcing, all as put in the building codes and so forth, then it becomes a serious issue. You know, then it becomes dangerous. It could even be a magnitude 2 earthquake if you're very close to the epicenter of that earthquake and you're inside a structure which is not properly constructed. That could collapse on you, and that's what's probably going to kill you. So for us in South Africa, this should be a warning that we should keep on conforming to the good building practices that we've had throughout the years and make sure that the buildings are properly constructed, because that's where people get killed in earthquakes.
How vigilant is our construction industry here in South Africa with regards to earthquakes and building. We see in places like Japan, they've got earthquake-proof buildings and so forth. What kind of buildings do we have in South Africa, or is it not really a consideration?
No, I mean, I think it is definitely a consideration. I think in any basic building codes all over the world, you know, people do look at what is the risk. I mean, the Council for Geoscience have got earthquake risk maps, you know, for South Africa, and geohazard risk maps. So based on that, there should be some built-in regulations when it comes to actually constructing things. The problem that we do have is, you know, and I'm sure Robert can also tell you about that, is when contractors start cutting corners to save money, like the collapse we had in KwaZulu-Natal. It's got nothing to do with earthquakes, but now you can imagine if you put up a structure like that, which is supposed to be built according to, you know, and got a small earthquake and then...
And that's where you get into trouble. Robert, in conclusion, I want to ask you, what did we learn from yesterday, and what is the message to the public out there around this kind of procedure?
I think it's emergency services personnel throughout, you know, South Africa. I think it was a wake-up call. If we were fast asleep, I'm sure we got a good wake-up call to say we need to be prepared, as we saw in some of the areas where there were those disasters. We need to make sure that people in those areas are aware as to what is it that they're supposed to do. Obviously, now we're looking at an aftershock. People need to understand that, you know, some of the structures might collapse. They need to stay alert, stay away from, you know, the collapsed buildings, because you might have a secondary collapse. And make sure that if it's at home, you know exactly where to go, because it's very bad to find that people in a very same house not knowing exactly where to go when there's an emergency. So in a room or in a house, they should know exactly where to go when there's an emergency. Obviously, they need to stay away from exterior walls. They need to make sure that they use mostly the interior walls, because are much more safer. If the building collapses, they are likely to be rescued in that building.
Finally, Dr. Panikek, are you expecting more earthquakes in the next days and weeks to come?
Well, maybe small aftershocks. You know, we don't really experience this a lot. But yeah, people should know that we will have earthquakes. I mean, we do live on the planet Earth, and, you know, we can't always predict when they will happen. You know, but
in the end, it was a little bit like Mother Earth just changing her position in bed, or so we can allude to something like that.
Yes.
We should expect it. We are residents of planet Earth. Now, just to recap for all of you, if you've missed it or if you've just come from another planet, the Council for Geoscience says there may be further aftershocks after yesterday's earthquake in the Orkney region in the northwest. The 5.5 magnitude quake claimed the life of a homeless man who was found under rubble at an abandoned mining village in Orkney. Now, the earthquake struck about 6 kilometers east of the mining town of Orkney in the northwest at a depth of around 10 kilometers. The quake was felt as far afield as Botswana and Swaziland. South Africans from Durban to the Eastern Cape and even Cape Town took to social media to report on feeling the quake.
Orkney, a sleeping mining town. Some seismologists are speculating that acid mine drainage may have triggered the quake that has claimed one life. A 31-year-old homeless man was found under debris in Orkney, close to the epicenter of the quake.
The place was already being damaged by the people who are going there to take things illegally and sell them around the scrapyard here in town.
In this town, windows were blown out and roofs collapsed. Its residents are in a state of shock. AngloGold Ashanti says 17 employees at its Great Nolingwa and Moab Kutsong mines sustained minor injuries. Engineers are inspecting shaft infrastructure. The earthquake occurred near its Vaal River operations, which include Great Nolingwa and Moab Kutsong. Power to the mine was temporarily interrupted, but has since been restored. Across the country, buildings were evacuated as the quake shook homes and businesses for about 40 seconds. People rushed onto the streets. The Council for Geoscience says the tremor was caused by the release of pressure that has been building up underground in the Orkney mines. The released pressure caused the earthquake.
The first one happened in 2005. It was a 5.3 in magnitude, and in fact, unfortunately, some people were killed underground, and there was a lot of damage to the buildings above the ground in the Stilfontein region. So this is something that's happened in the past, and like I said, the rule of thumb, one can expect it to happen in the future.
In Johannesburg, people rushed out of buildings.
I was busy in the kitchen making coffee. It was my tea time. Then all of a sudden, the wall started shaking.
I was busy working, and the next thing, my chair is shaking. And I'm looking at the back to see who's shaking my chair. The next thing, there's no one, and under my feet, it was shaking badly. I threw everything in the dustbin.
It was so scary. It was shaking. I ran out of the office. I didn't know where I was going, but I just ran out.
An SABC crew filming near Louis Botha Avenue was also affected.
Rehad nailed it. I saw them.
In Durban, people were evacuated from buildings across the city. Aftershocks are still expected.
Now, the University of Pretoria, Amatex, evacuated their students and staff members from some of the buildings on the grounds. We asked students then who were on campus straight after the evacuations to record and send us from their mobile phones some of the people's reactions. Let's just take a look at some of them.
I was in the lift going up to the 22nd floor of the humanities building, and I was alone, and it started shaking quite a bit, and I thought there was something wrong. I panicked, and I looked at my phone to see if I had signal or battery, because I thought the lift was going to break, but then when it got to my floor, I ran out of there, and it was fine. Yeah, geez, so like the ground shook, and it was like...
It was trembling, and then I thought maybe there was an explosion or something, but it just kept on trembling. So I thought, right, that's an earthquake.
A bit of a shocker. You don't expect it. Not in South Africa, at least.
That's right. South Africans are not used to this kind of thing, and of course, straight after everyone, before lunchtime even, everyone were on social media telling us what their experience had been. Now, let's just take a look at some of the comments and what's been happening on social media. Vaughan ZA says, work colleagues' house was damaged due to the earthquake. Never thought there would be any damage in the Durban area. Call it hectic, he says. Yes, even in Durban they felt it. D. Gunner says, I almost died today. I live in Klerksdorp, praying for fellow workers at the 11th shaft. Yes, we can report, fortunately, no lives have been lost in that area until now. William says, Quake SA, I was in Atterbury Spa in Pretoria, and when the quake happened, people were screaming and some products got damaged. Adriana says, 17 miners injured, Anglo Gold Orkney at Westphal Hospital. Shaft miners brought to the surface, Klerksdorp, that is. And this is a picture incoming from one of the houses in the Orkney area. If we move it up a little bit, we'll see who the picture comes from. Where the picture come from? Can we have a look where the picture comes from? Scroll it up. Nope. We missed it. Oh, it's from Horisani Sitoli, one of the damaged houses at the Kuma Township in Orkney. He says, thank you very much, Horisani, for sending in that picture. We love your pictures. We love your contributions. It really adds a lot to what we do. Let's take a quick look at the front pages from around the globe today. In the world, people don't care about this earthquake that was in South Africa. In Spain, papers are looking at the effects of the deadly Ebola virus that continues to challenge medical researchers and experts. In Latin America, there's also a strong focus on the Ebola virus that has now claimed nearly 900 lives. And in Europe, the Times has a picture of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, as well as Prince Harry, on the front page of the Tower of London, where thousands of poppies have been planted in memory of those who lost their lives in the Great War. Now, South Africa's most destructive earthquake occurred on the 29th of September in 1969 in the Tilbach area and registered an alarming 6.3 on the Richter scale, stronger than that of the 1809 Cape Town earthquake that destroyed a local Milnerton farm. The Ceres Tilbach earthquake was followed by a series of aftershocks, the strongest, which was a 5.7 aftershock that occurred a few months later on the 14th of April 1970. Caused much of devastation back then, so it just puts into context what happened yesterday here in South Africa. You're watching Newsroom. We'll be back after a short break.
BMW M4 Coupe. One with the machine.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom here on SABC News. Nearly 300 schools from across the country are not teaching pure maths to grade 12 pupils because there is apparently no demand for the subject in certain schools. What is worrying education experts is that pupils who are choosing maths literacy instead of maths will be unable to study medicine, science and engineering at tertiary institutions. Recently, the country was also shocked to learn that matric maths teachers from KwaZulu-Natal performed dismally when tested with past matric maths papers, with a quarter of the 253 teachers getting below 39%. Now, to talk to us about the challenges that education in South Africa has to face when it comes to subjects like pure math, we are now joined by the spokesperson of the South African Democratic Teachers Union, SATU, Nomusa Tembi. Good morning to you, ma'am, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, sir, and morning to the viewers.
Very worrying stats that we put up on the screen there, but let's start at the top. Fewer schools offering math. Why is this happening when math and science are said to be the magic pill that's going to develop South Africa's economy in the next 50 years?
The main issues are to do with the skilling of teachers and also the availability of right equipment in our schools. For the teachers, in most schools where black teachers teach, before the new dispensation, we found that teachers were not, most of the teacher training colleges that were there were not offering maths and science. So teachers were just given, not so crucial subjects. And this has resulted to fewer teachers who are able to teach maths and science. We know the situation is demanding that there should be more maths and science, but it's something that cannot happen. We wish it could happen overnight, but it cannot because teachers have to go undergo training. The department has got to recruit more teachers and train the teachers that are there to be at the right level, because even the curriculum has changed, but teachers have not been skilled to such an extent that they can deliver the curriculum excellently.
It must be very worrying for you that 1 in 4 of the teachers tested in this case failed by under 39% on a math paper. That must put us really at a crisis level, don't you think?
Yes, we are at a crisis level.
Let's go on about... Let's carry on, because yes, one part of it is the teachers, but the other segment when it comes to schooling is the learner themselves and then also the parents. Do you feel that in some communities we're battling to get to engage the parents in the schooling of children?
Yes, it's quite prevalent in our communities, because you find that the parents would sometimes they feel that they cannot cope or they are not educated enough to deal with matters at school, and therefore they don't participate. They leave everything to the teacher to find solutions to, when in most cases they are also needed. Whether one is educated or not, as a parent, you can contribute.
What is SATU's plan then to improve the situation of their members not being 100% equipped to teach things like math and so forth? Do you have a plan in place?
We are no more relying on government purely for teacher training and development. We've even begun or started an institute where we are training our own members. We are looking at not only maths and science, we are looking at many things, even including leadership in schools.
What are some of the other challenges that you as SATU feel that you are facing within this environment, especially with a focus on math and science?
We find that with the new curriculum, it dictates that, you know, teachers should work closely with each, should give individual attention to the learners. But you find that our schools have got 50 learners per class, which is hard for a teacher to manage and to give individual attention. You find that, especially in rural areas, the highest number of learner per teacher, the ratio is the highest in those areas. So you find that, you know, teachers in rural areas will end up leaving the schools, and there'll be more shortage because they cannot cope with giving individual attention to so many learners.
And what is your message then to the parents out there, finally, of these children that obviously are struggling on both sides?
Parents mustn't undermine themselves. They have a big role to play in the education of their children. They must do their best to go to the schools and find out what is it that they can do, how they can help. And even at home, they mustn't leave the children to do as they please. They must keep encouraging them, because it's not that the children don't want to learn. Sometimes the circumstances makes them to lose heart. They must be there to encourage children at home and also to be at school and say to the teachers, we are there for you. How can we help you?
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. It's very concerning indeed that not only our children are battling with math and science, but it seems our teachers are as well. Thank you for joining us today. The spokesperson of the South African Democratic Teachers Union, Nomusa Qembi, joining us this morning. Thank you once again, ma'am.
Thank you.
Now, let's take another look at where you're at on social media. What are you talking about? What are the issues concerning us today? It looks like Ebola is a big talking point, not just here, but all around the world. There we have somebody giving us a little breakdown as to what you should be looking out for in the first 2 weeks. That's Miaza says, hopefully it won't happen to us. Ebola symptoms, those are Ebola symptoms. Of course, you can go to our Twitter page as well. There's a picture incoming with somebody working in a quarantine area, one would think. Dan, possible carrier of Ebola virus monitored in Wales. Why not in quarantine already? Well, that is a question that a lot of people are asking. I can tell you, though, that it was very difficult to contain this virus. The Ebola virus, I must tell you, is not an airborne virus like the flu virus, which is a good thing. However, it is, you can contract it by mixing bodily fluids and the like, and being in contact with people who are suffering from the disease. So the incubation period is very short, and quite often it looks like malaria or even the common cold in the first couple of days of contracting the disease. So very, very worrying. Let's take a quick look at our Facebook page and what's happening there today. You'll see there that police in Durban are searching for a suspected serial killer after the decomposing bodies of 4 women were found near a local sports stadium in Lindelani Township. You will also see there that Nigeria's Murtala Muhammad International Airport in Lagos has stepped up its health screening measures after the nation's second Ebola case was confirmed there earlier this week. And as we mentioned earlier on the show, there may be further aftershocks after yesterday's earthquake in the Orkney region in the Northwest Province. So be aware and don't panic. You can find all of these stories and more on our Facebook page. That's where we keep you updated with all the stories that's all around you in the news right now. Of course, just to take a look back in history, on this day in 1945, the American B-29 bomber Enola Gay dropped the world's first atom bomb over the city of Hiroshima in Japan. Approximately 80,000 people were killed instantly as a result of the blast, and another 35,000 were injured. At least another 60,000 would be dead by the end of the year from the effects of the fallout. A dark day, some would say, but let's take a look back at the dropping of this bomb 69 years ago today.
RM4 Coupe. One with the machine.
Hello and welcome back. You're with Newsroom on SABC News. Let's just take a look at the top stories this morning. Officials are assisting families in the northwest whose homes were damaged by yesterday's 5.5 magnitude earthquake. Around 400 houses were damaged in Orkney, as well as 3 clinics in another northwest town, Klerksdorp, have had to be shut down due to severe structural damage. The Council for Geoscience says it will take a few days to establish exactly what caused the quake. George Luca, the man accused of killing Teaser's strip club boss Lolly Jackson, is expected to appear in the Kempton Park Magistrates Court this morning on a charge of possession of stolen property. Luca will, however, reportedly not be appearing in court in person. He is expected to appear for the murder of Jackson in January next year. African leaders yesterday called for a deeper economic relationship with the United States at the annual US-Africa Summit in Washington, hailing investment pledges as a fresh step in the right direction. Speaking on a panel of African heads, President Jacob Zuma told the US-Africa Business Forum that Africa is now better organized to deal with the challenges facing the continent. Israeli and Palestinian delegations are in Cairo for truce talks as a 72-hour ceasefire in Gaza appears to be holding for a second day. Israel withdrew ground forces from the Gaza Strip after the ceasefire got underway yesterday morning. The truce was mediated by Egypt as a first step towards negotiations on a more enduring end to the month-old war. Remember, all these top stories are available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Now, Rays of Hope is a non-profit organization which manages large numbers of social outreach projects in Alexandra Township in northern Johannesburg. Rays of Hope aims to enable individuals and families to improve all aspects of their lives, thereby creating a lasting impact on a broader Alex residential community. We are today joined by the Executive Director of Rays of Hope, Jennifer Adams, to tell us more about the work being done in Alexandra. Welcome to the show, Jennifer.
Thank you, Katrine. Thank you for being here.
Take us back, 1991, where everything started.
Well, yes, I think the world is filled with trauma, but it's also filled with good people. And, of course, I wasn't part of Rays of Hope back then, but it started in a church, Rosebank Union Church, and there was a challenge put out to the people that Jesus Christ himself changed the world by loving individual people. And a group of young people, as often the young people do take the lead, felt that they'd like to try to do the same. And so coming out of that, they started a Saturday school back then. And the Saturday school, it was interesting to hear your previous guest talking about maths and some of the problems. So the Saturday school started to help children learn maths and English and other subjects, but it's very relationship driven. So volunteers go to the Saturday school, and it's still running today after all of these years. Every Saturday, or for all of these 20 plus years, a group of volunteer tutors, sometimes more than 100 of them, go into what's perceived as a not safe area and build relationships with young students and help them not only to learn maths and English, but to change themselves from within.
Now, most of the projects are based on skills development rather than handing out. Can you tell us a bit more about the method behind that?
Very much so, yeah. I think it came from those days of relationship changing, and I think that we're often given the privilege, Katrine, of building into people's lives and being able to change them. But we're never given the privilege of living people's lives for them. So it's about helping that person change from within, helping that person be able to make better choices, live their lives in a more fulfilled and better way. And we try to give them the tools to do that by changing them from within. Sometimes, of course, that involves helping with physical things. We do give food, we do give clothes. But really, it's about helping people, meeting them at the point of their need and helping them change so that they can live their own lives.
Now, you have the Saturday school. Tell us a bit more about the other project that you guys also run in Alexandra.
Yeah, there are quite a few. Most of them relate to children. So we run a children's home, a child-headed households program, some health and AIDS stuff, There's a home-based care team that go in really palliative care to help the sick and dying, but often lives are saved. There's a granny support group. As we all know, in this time, many grannies have been left with the unexpected burden of having to care for their grandchildren.
We were actually on a tour of Alex the other day, and they showed us and introduced us to some of these grannies. Can you just, those grannies, the type of work that they do and the role they play in the community?
Absolutely. I mean, the grannies, historically, of course, in communities like Alexandra, the Gogo has great stature in the community, and people love her, and she's revered and has an important role to play. But sadly, because of the AIDS epidemic, much of the next generation have passed away. And so grannies are often left. I mean, we have one granny who's lost 10 of her 11 children, but leaving her with the enormous task of bringing up grandchildren unexpectedly on a tiny pension, and without the skills or resources really to be able to do that. But grannies play an enormous role in bringing up the next generation. Many people are out to work and away looking for jobs, and the grannies are left looking after the children in many cases, and they do an awesome job.
Another project you also run is the Africa Works.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, the Africa Works program started really to enable people who we call unemployable in a country